Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Center for European Policy Analysis. This is post-election briefing on Italy, where we're going to discuss what's next for Rome's foreign policy. My name is Jana Brancalini. I'm an American journalist based in Italy and a non-resident fellow with SIPA's Digital Innovation Initiative. And we have an all-star lineup today to discuss the topic that is part of SIPA's broader work on transatlantic defense and security. So a quick recap to start. After outgoing Premier Mario Draghi's government fell in August, Italy held a snap election on September 25th. Far-right leader Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy was the leading party with 26% of the vote. Meloni's party has formed a coalition with Matteo Salvini's Lega party and Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia, which each received about 8% of the electorate. This leads to a number of questions about how Italy will confront key issues, including the war in Ukraine, energy security, migration, and basically everything that you've been reading about lately. Meloni is a polarizing figure. She embraces the Mussolini-era slogan of God, homeland, and family, and is close with authoritarian leaders in Europe. Brothers of Italy's leadership preaches national sovereignty and Christian identity. It opposes gay rights, wants to restrict abortion access, and supports financial policies such as flat taxes that redistribute wealth from the bottom up. Its allies in the Lega party and Forza Italia have historically been close to Russia. Simply put, much of the West is worried. But as we've said, the war in Ukraine, energy crisis, and Europe's pandemic recovery funds will all impact the extent to which Meloni can realize her vision for Italy's foreign and domestic policy. So today we have four incredibly accomplished and experienced guests who will discuss what changes we can expect under the new coalition government. First, we have Dr. Marta Dasu, Senior Director for European Affairs at the Aspen Institute. She is the editor-in-chief of Aspen Institute's Italia journal Aspenia and was Italy's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs from November 2011 to February 2014. She sits on numerous boards, including Leonardo Finmeccanica and the Council for the United States and Italy, and she also contributes regularly to Italian newspapers. So thank you for being here. Next, we have Ambassador Louis Eisenberg, who was the US Ambassador to the Republic of Italy and the Republic of San Marino from 2017 to 2021. He's a former managing partner of Iron Hill Investments LLC and finance chairman of the Republican National Committee. He too sits on numerous boards, including Selecta Group AG and Fincantieri Marine Group. So thank you for being with us. Then we have Federico Borsari, who is the Leonardo Fellow with SIPA's Transatlantic Defense and Security Program, where he focuses on unmanned technologies and their military implications in Europe and beyond. He is also a NATO 2030 Global Fellow and a visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Happy to have you. And finally, Dr. Dario Cristiani is a resident senior fellow with the German Marshall Fund of the United States, where he focuses on Italian foreign policy in the Mediterranean. He has more than 15 years experience as a private political risk consultant working on Mediterranean and emerging markets. Thank you, Dario, for being here. So we're just going to start with sort of a broad look at how we can expect Italy's foreign policy to change. So let's start with Dr. Dasu. What is Italy's current role within the EU, and how is that likely to change?
Thank you very much, first of all, for this invitation. Very happy to be here with all friends, like former ambassador to Italy, Louis Eisenberg. So happy to see all of you. It's a very interesting topic to decide whether Italy's foreign policy is going to change, how much, in which directions with this new government. Let me first of all say something relating to domestic politics. This is not a nostalgic vote. I mean, all the polls and all the analysis about the results show that the Italian electorate was willing to have something new. There is an extreme volatility. They decided in the past to vote for the Five-Star Movement, then they shifted to the League before, to the Five-Star Movement after, and then to Giorgia Meloni, just because she was the outsider. So I would say it is not nostalgic, it is the search for some sort of new faces in power, the role of the outsider, if you wish. Then a second important point, in my view, is the following one. Mario Draghi himself has recently said, closing the Council of Ministers, that Italy's foreign policy is not going to change. This was his final judgment or his wish, I do not know, but in any case, his reading is that Giorgia Meloni is not going to change. First of all, is not going to change the policy of our country vis-a-vis the US. The pro-Atlantic line is going to stay there. And I think this is true in the sense that Giorgia Meloni is quite convinced that the link to the US is of a fundamental importance for Italy's security and foreign policy. Clearly, as you mentioned, she is much closer to the conservative side of the spectrum. So his idea of the US is close to the idea of the conservative part of the Grand Old Party. She went very recently, that February, to the Conservative Political Action Conference and the likes. Still, she is someone who really believes that it is in Italy's national interest to be close to the US. It's much more complicated, if you wish, to make predictions about her policy vis-a-vis the European Union. In a sense, she's portraying herself as a kind of, she puts Italy, if you wish, in the same position like Poland, meaning a country which has a very firm pro-Atlantic line, but a quite cool European political line. I wouldn't say that Meloni is close to Hungary. To give you an example, in the most recent conference she made for Vox, the extreme party in Spain, she forgot completely Hungary, precisely because Hungary is pro-Russian. And she mentioned the idea that Italy is going to follow the path of countries like Poland, like the Czech Republic. And this is interesting from a certain point of view, since the Ukrainian war, the center of gravity of the EU itself is shifting east. The real question mark is whether Italy, being a major economy in Europe and being a founding country, will be able to establish a sort of trade union between the core Europe and the new Europe, to put it this way. In any case, she has clarified her ideas on Europe, and Italy in general has very important constraints on Europe, even if her beliefs are not pro-integration, are not pro a closer union. The fact is that Italy is getting a lot of funding from the European Union. For Italy, the BCE is probably the most important European organization. So, I mean, she can't do, she doesn't have all this room for maneuvering. So, in my view, in the end, she will be quite pragmatic on Europe too. She doesn't speak any longer in critical terms about the euro. There is no idea of an Italy exit. This is part of the past, if you wish. This is the old legacy. Nowadays, she speaks in terms of a different division of responsibilities, of competencies between the EU level and nation states. In her view, the EU has to focus much more on common defense and energy. These are the two major tests for Europe in the future, leaving to the nation states micromanagement, if you wish. So, I mean, an interesting position. One last remark. She from the opposition. She was very firm on supporting Draghi's government moves vis-à-vis the Ukrainian war. She was not forced to do that, but she decided to do that. Now she is in coalition with the League and with Forza Italia, Berlusconi, two parties that have pro-Russian inclinations in their curriculum vitae. The point is that, in my view, she will be able to get cross-partisan support on Ukraine. We have already seen today with what happened for the naming of La Russa from Brothers of Italy to the chair of the Senate, that we will have fractures within the new coalition, but part of the opposition will go in support, and this is much more likely on foreign and security policy than on domestic politics.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dasu. So basically what we're seeing is sort of a classic difference between election rhetoric and then the realities of governing.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So next, Ambassador Eisenberg, if I could have your thoughts on the Italy-US relationship. I know that you were ambassador for the duration of 3 separate Italian governments. In your experience, what sort of changes on a practical level between the relationship when a government changes, and do you expect that trend to continue with the new one? Oh, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Following Dr. Dasu is always an interesting and very positive way to go. But the way I would have to agree with almost everything that the good doctor said. But going through the 3 governments that I had, I would say that the pragmatic piece of it will stay in place, because I've had the opportunity to meet and talk briefly at a lunch with Giorgia Meloni, and I found her to be extremely sharp. She was conservative, which obviously would fit to some meaningful extent my political history. And but the Italian government and the country itself are of critical importance to the EU, to the US, and frankly, to the world's problems that are now becoming numerous and very difficult. I think one of the things that was most positive about the governments all the time was the fact that they had a president in place who serves for 7 years and is still there, in President Mattarella. And I think even as we speak, they are with Giorgia Meloni's leadership. And interestingly, that the 3 have teamed together so that Berlusconi, Forza Lega, and indeed Fratelli had the only coalition, and you really need a coalition to win, position in Italy. So if you made note, it was very cleverly done, and she won by a meaningful percentage over both Salvini and Berlusconi. What's happening now is the appointment, I think it's today actually, will begin where she picks who the different players are going to be and in what positions. And I think that will be key with Mattarella's guidance, I believe, or at least, at the very least, his keen interest as to how that develops and who serves in what position, because that will indicate whether the things she's pledged to do can be carried out. She's got to be very focused on the economy, because there is still well over 100 billion, I think, due from the EU. And I think the need for those dollars will be so critical that her relationship with the EU, despite anything going on with Hungary, Poland, or other very conservative countries, will be in line with the EU's decisions. I think it would be a totally unexpected surprise if she were to not put that in a very high position, given Italy's financial gains. The war is changing everybody's position, period, both economically, from a defense position, and from the way in which they convene their alliances. And I would say that my experience was that Italy is a close part of the operations of the United States government anywhere and almost everywhere in Europe. I see no reason why that relationship will change. When Giorgia Meloni becomes Prime Minister, which I believe will be soon, I think she has been to the United States. She's converged with the Republican Party, which is the conservative party in the United States, as well as others. So I have a relatively positive view, and will watch with interest where Mr. Salvini and others are placed in the new government. I think that will draw interest. She also will share some of Salvini's interest in migration, and that going in the future will also loom as a potential problem to be met by Italy. So from the United States point of view, we're used to, as you pointed out, seeing rapid changes. But I have a feeling that should Giorgia Meloni proceed as I think she will, she may be in there for a longer run. So with that, I will sort of stop and leave it open to you, my dear.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Let's turn now to Federico Borsari. The war in Ukraine has been a wake-up call for European countries to take their own defense capabilities more seriously. What steps has Italy undertaken so far to improve its own defense, and what is the new government's vision for EU defense more broadly?
Thank you, Jana. Thank you, everyone. Well, that's a good question. I think, Italy was already, improving its position when it comes to defense, not just in terms of, contribution to NATO, but also in the realm of European defense. So, proceeding step by step, I think when it comes to Ukraine, the previous government, Draghi, was already, doing a lot in terms of military support to Ukraine. And I think with the new government that should be elected soon, I don't see, particularly changes here, at least in the short term. Of course, there are some fractures within the majority when it comes to, the approach to the war, whether in terms of diplomatic, I'd say, position towards Russia, but also in terms of sanctions. But when it comes to military support, a fifth package of weapons has been, recently discussed and is about to be approved. So Italy has done a lot for Ukraine, and I think will continue to do so for the foreseeable future, unless, of course, there are some incredible changes or fractures within the majority. When it comes to NATO, Italy, for instance, has done quite a lot, of course, and it's the third contributor to the alliance after the US and Germany in terms of operations. So it's really a key player in the alliance. It has contributed to several operations, and it's now involved in nine NATO operations. It has reinforced NATO eastern flank with new men and new equipment, especially in Bulgaria, and Hungary. and Latvia, for instance, but also in Romania. So Italy is really committed to NATO, and I think this will be a key feature of the new government. Of course, there are some challenges, especially when it comes to, of course, defense policies in terms of spending, for instance. So Italy is trying to reach the 2% GDP target, as many other countries have done in recent years, with some difficulties, of course, and the pandemic was certainly an obstacle in this respect. So now Italy spends 1.5% of its GDP in defense, but with the Draghi government, a compromise was reached in March, a very difficult one, to reach the 2% by 2028. But I think the new government has committed to fasten and to expedite this path and reach the 2% GDP target by 2025. So of course, I mean, there are many obstacles, especially in terms of funding, as I was saying, but also in terms of coordination with other countries when it comes to European defense. So Italy, with the new government, I think will try to promote a lot the idea of European defense. And in the electoral manifesto of Brothers of Italy, for instance, this is clearly stated that European defense is a key enabler for not just for Italy, but for Europe, of course, in terms of autonomous and more like proactive foreign policy. Now that the US are also looking at China, of course. So Italy, I think, will try to improve cooperation in terms of joint procurement, in terms of industrial cooperation. There are several programs where Italy is involved, like the Eurodrone program, for instance, where Italy plays a key role. There are some cutting edge technology program like the Tempest, where Italy is cooperating with Sweden, with England, and Japan, and wants to have a big role here, and many other capabilities program that are in the making. Of course, there are both domestic and domestic constraints, but also challenges within the European Union more broadly. So domestically, Italy has still a subdivision of funds very unbalanced within its own budget for defense, and a lot of funds go to personnel, while they should be distributed more equally between the investment sector and the implementation segment also, which is very important to maintain readiness, equipment, and training. So now Italy spends almost 60% of its budget for defense in personnel, but many other countries have revised this policy and are now distributing funds more equally, as I was saying. When it comes to the European Union more broadly, of course, there is I would say, challenges when it comes to, of course, joint procurement, and also, planning in terms of project, because there are national interests, there are economic interests, there is industrial, of course, competition to a certain extent, and in European industry when it comes to defense is very fragmented. So I think there are some challenges that Italy can help to overcome, but it's still, I mean, they are still there, and so the new government, I think, will try to do more compared to the previous one, to improve European Union defense, of course.
Okay, great, thank you. Turning now to Dario Cristiani. We've mentioned migration a little bit. We've also talked about Eastern Europe, but let's talk about the southern flank. So what is Italy's role in the Mediterranean from a security perspective, trade perspective, energy perspective, And do you expect that the sort of existing partnerships and alliances will continue or change in some way?
Well, first of all, I thank you for having me. And well, every time there is an Italian election, we always think or expect some significant changes in the Italian foreign policy approach, especially if there is a clear like a new majority and a completely new government. But then at the end of the day, we tend there is a bit of, not, I don't want to say disappointment, but at the end of the day, very little change. I think if nothing changed in terms of foreign policy after the yellow-green coalition government in 2018, that theoretically was to be one of the most innovative like alliances in the history of Italian politics in regard to foreign policy issues, from NATO to Russia, from China to the approach to the Mediterranean. I don't really see how most of the historical directions of Italian foreign policy might change these days. Of course, there are a number of issues, as Ambassador Eisenberg already mentioned. Migration for a center-right or right-center coalition, whatever you want to call it, is a crucial topic. Although we should also realize that the reality these days is a little bit different than 5-6 years ago, in which migration was at the top of the concerns of the Italian public opinion. If you look at the most recent polls, like, this is not an element that is as important as it used to be. Also, it depends on the composition of the government. If Matteo Salvini becomes Minister of the Interior, of course, there might be a bit more of a significant focus on that, because it's for the League under Salvini. This is one of the elements of identity, let's say. So I think first and foremost, the Mediterranean for the new government will be an arena in which Italy should try to find some of the answers to the problems related to energy. This is why I think that the current Draghi's government has been very active with Algeria. I don't think this is going to change. The Draghi's government has been a little bit less active in Libya over the past year, but I would say that this is in line with the broader European approach, because basically in Libya, especially after the window of opportunity, let's say, that was that emerged with the government of the national unity, the return of intra-militia infighting and these problems created some issues that Europe struggle both to understand and to cope with, because of the lack of significant both military capacities on the European side, and also this idea that Europe remains primarily a civilian power. So when there are situations like that, is a little bit complicated to intervene. I think if there is a potential problem but challenge for the next government, is the fact that the Mediterranean, which is historically what we tend to call one of the three main circles of Italian foreign policy, together with Atlanticism and Europeanism, there is going to be a mounting, a strengthening connection between the dynamics of sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. And this is an element that we have witnessed over the past 10 years becoming particularly significant, and is going to be even more so, not only in terms of security because of the spread of jihadism in Sahel, West Africa, Mozambique, and elsewhere, but also in terms of demographic dynamics. Africa is the only continent that is growing demographically. In terms of economic relations, in terms of the protagonism of external powers, Russia, China, India, the Gulf countries, Turkey, but also of African powers that have ambitions on the continent. I think to Algeria, I think Morocco, I think Nigeria, and many others. So from this point of view, this coalition might struggle a little bit, because even in their discourse on foreign policy, they have a very clear attitude towards Atlanticism, I would say, despite the League and Forza Italia. Even on the European side, I think when Fratelli d'Italia mentions the idea of working together with Poland, I don't see that as a sort of alliance between sovereignist countries, but I see that as a normal, internal political dynamic inside the EU of trying to find another big country that can represent a potential partner when it comes to internal European affairs. Then, it's not a mystery that many inside Fratelli d'Italia, they see the opportunity to strengthen the relation with Spain, despite the fact that there is no Vox at the government in Spain, because they think that, for instance, by working together to build some pipelines in the future, the potential of Spain as a energy hub, because of the presence of regasificators that cannot be connected to the European network at the moment because of the French opposition, might become an opportunity both for Italy and for Europe. So on this, again, working with Spain, working with Poland and Central European countries, well, those who know a little bit of Italian foreign policy history might find some De Michelis flavor here between the quadrangolare and the hexagonale, and the work that Italy made with Spain in the early 90s before the launch of the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership in Barcelona in 1995. So nothing too new, I would say. Again, let's see who is going to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Let's see how the external and domestic constraints play in relationship with what the government wants to do, but I don't see any groundbreaking change coming in the next few months and years. Thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like none of you are really expecting any big seismic shifts. I wonder if maybe that's because even though Meloni is a new face, a lot of the people behind her are very much sort of institutionalists and people who've been, part of Berlusconi's government, who've been, in parliament for a long time. And so I'm just going to throw that out there for later if anybody wants to take that up. But for the moment, let's turn back to Dr. Dasu. We've mentioned, I think a couple of speakers have already mentioned the EU recovery funds. The COVID-19 pandemic recovery funds are so crucial to Italy getting out of its current economic crisis that sort of limits room for maneuvering. Just as background for the people watching, Italy was the biggest recipient of the EU recovery funds with more than 191 billion euros. And the biggest chunk of that, 37.5%, is going to climate initiatives. So, Dr. Dasu, there's been talk of renegotiating parts of the National Resilience and Recovery Plan. Do you think that those priorities are going to change? How much are the initiatives that have already been started going to be continued or abandoned? What can we kind of expect from the EU Recovery Fund landscape?
Thank you very much. You already mentioned that Italy is de facto is the most important receiver of these funds, and a real renegotiation would be a problem. I'm quite sure that the new government will avoid that. Marginal adjustments are possible, clearly. There is also a real difficulty in implementation. Italy has always been in difficulties when when utilizing European cohesion funds already. So there is a real bureaucratic problem to be overcome. But I think that these funds are very important for Italy, and Italy will go along with the Draghi line, more or less. Since you mentioned the new coalition government, I would like to add something. Giorgia Meloni is sharp enough, as Lewis was rightly recalling, to put in places which are key for foreign and defense people who have an international reputation. For instance, the foreign minister of the new government will likely be Tajani. Tajani is from Forza Italia, the Berlusconi's party. He has been the vice president of the European Commission. Certainly, he has a line on Europe which is completely compatible. I mean, with the Italian legacy and with the transatlantic relationship. Salvini will be out from the Interior Ministry, that has already been decided. She's failing in the attempt to name as Minister for the Budget and the Economy a member of the board of the ECB, Fabio Panetta, who is apparently refusing because he would like to go to the Bank of Italy, more or less. And it can be that the choice goes to name Giancarlo Giorgetti, who is from the League, but he is considered to be absolutely mainstream. So she will be able, in my view, to accommodate the idea of a political government, but made up of a right balance, if you wish, of inclinations. The point is whether this coalition, because Lewis was mentioning very rightly at the very beginning that given the electoral system, you need a strong coalition to be able to govern. This coalition will not be a strong one. We already seen it. We have already seen it today with the first episode of a sort of defection of Forza Italia in front of the naming of the chair of the Senate. So it would be rather chaotic. But my point was, in foreign policy, a large part of the opposition is in favor of the Draghi's line. So when important decisions will have to be made on sanctions to Russia, on Ukraine, points where the League could hesitate, for instance, sanctions. Salvini is very critical about the impact of sanctions, defending the fact that Italy business is suffering too much and Russia is suffering not enough, in a sense. Sanctions do not work. This is his view. But in those instances, in my view, Meloni will be able to have the cross-partisan support. A final point on two final points. One on the fact that Italy's foreign policy never changes. This is the point made by Dario in particular. Yes, up to a point, because in 2019, Italy signed this famous memorandum of understanding with China, which was in a sense a change, an important change. And Draghi was backing government, defending the tradition of Italy's foreign policy, the relationship to the US and with Europe first. On energy and energy issues, it can be this government is a bit more climate skeptical, to put it this way. I mean, energy security is becoming more important in a sense, or in any case is disrupting the way in which the European Union has been conceiving the Green Deal. The reality, however, is that Italy has made some very important steps forward in energy diversification recently, and that will play out next year and in 2024 in a very important way. For instance, Algeria already is our most important partner as far as gas is concerned. So since our focus will shift from east to south and to the US for liquefied natural gas. I guess that Italy will defend the need of a security policy and defense policy in the Mediterranean region, also for energy reasons. And so we will have an important task in setting up a EU security policy vis-a-vis the Mediterranean, but also we will try to rebalance a bit the overriding importance of the Eastern Front, because we need to have NATO operations also in the southern front of Europe. So this is my feeling, and I close it up saying it will be quite messy, maybe, because a coalition government is not an easy one. In a sense, we have the first female prime minister confronted with two persons, Berlusconi and Salvini, who apparently don't like her too much. So it will be a quite chaotic running, but in a sense, she will be in the position, as far as foreign policy and defense is concerned, to get a cross-partisan support.
Okay, thank you. I'd also note that she managed to be prime minister, and one of her male colleagues who's been wanting that for a long time has not reached that level yet. So that'll be interesting. Back to Ambassador Eisenberg. Can you tell us a little bit, we mentioned previously that Meloni has attended the Conservative Political Action Conference in the US. Can you talk a little bit more about her connection to the conservative movement in the US and whether the upcoming midterm elections might kind of affect some of these issues that we've been discussing today?
Well, the easy answer to that for me is I'm really not sure how deep, how long, or what the relationship is, other than you're correct. She has attended several meetings, and much of her policy that she's stated and been upright with is consistent with the Conservative Party in the United States. I would say Dr. Dessous always hits some of the really good points to educate me for future comments. But I would say that two things. One, appointing the appropriate ministers to their positions is going to be of critical importance. And since my inclination is always to put that economic element first, I think if in fact Giorgetti assumes that position, I would consider him one of the most capable, both from an intellectual point of view and from the technical pieces of running a complicated economy. So that would be a very significant positive. The second piece of this, which I hope is a more uniting one, is there was no mistake, if in fact real, that Salvini and Berlusconi, both very sophisticated politicians who have run for a long time, had unusual relationships with the leader of the military and the war that is now going on in Ukraine. And I think in an almost undeniable way. So I would say the focus is twofold, and it overrides almost a lot of the other things that will determine whether, if Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni can move in the right way and maintain some coalition, because my experience in those three changes I had was the disintegration of the coalitions. And now we know Five Star is really diminutive relative to being the very strong position they were. You have to have a coalition. I think moving forward, the focus is going to be on those two folds. Some interest in migration if it picks up, which does raise a question I'd love to have answered. When I arrived in 2017 or thereabouts, and when I left, Russia was fighting a fairly blistering battle in Libya. It's true, I think it was the Wagner Group or somebody else represented some, but it was a bad war going over for oil. And I have seen and heard very little conversation as to what's happening in Libya and Libyan oil and how important that should be at this moment. And Russia's activity in Libya, I'm surprised, hasn't been a foremost piece of discussion, which perhaps I missed. But I would say those two things, the economy and the war, the handling of the distribution of those very important funds, and how we handle the gas and oil in light of the war are really at the top of the list of determining Giorgia and Italy's current new government success.
Okay, thank you. And any thoughts on the midterm elections, whether that's going to upset the balance we've been discussing here?
Sure. Our midterm elections are a flip of the coin right now. It appears to be so close to both parties. Our former president is fighting battles that in a number of different places, but has not given up the word that he may well intend to run for re-election. And he has been supportive of a significant number of the Republicans running for office in the Senate and the House. So that will be an important determination. But I would say in most cases, the races in the Senate and the House are too close to give a good call at this point. I don't know how helpful that is, but that's how I see it.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. Let's turn back to Federico. We've talked about the fact that, on the campaign trail, Meloni condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. She's expressed support for NATO and military aid for Kiev. But back in 2014, she opposed EU sanctions on Russia after the invasion of Crimea. And in her book, I Am Giorgia, which came out in 2021, she wrote that Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote, defends European values and Christian identity. So I'm just curious, what do we make of all this? What do we make of this about face? And can we really trust, I guess, that she will continue with the most recent line of rhetoric?
Well,
Thank you, Jana.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Sorry. No worries. No, yeah. This is a very, very complicated question in the sense that, of course, Giorgia Meloni, had precise ideas when it comes to, of course, Christian values and, protecting and safeguarding, European as a community, European Union as a community, and Christian values, of course. So I think back in 2014, when she expressed, sympathetically her support for, the Crimean referendum, for instance, besides, her, opposition to the sanctions at that time, I think we were in a specific, historical moment where, there was a lot of uncertainty in Europe and in Italy, of course, but also within NATO on how to deal with Russia at that moment, given the, the hybrid and gray zone, aggression at that time that Russia, launched against Ukraine. So I think, everyone was really following specifically his own or her own, ideas rather than, think cohesively at that time. But now, of course, since, Russia aggression has been, in the making overtly, and, it's clear to everyone what Vladimir Putin's objectives are. I mean, Giorgia Meloni, I think she's really aware that, for the sake of Italy foreign policy and for Italy's interest, keep, Rome, firmly in the Western fold is of the utmost importance. And I think she has changed the idea explicitly when it comes to Russia, and she's very close. I'm speaking about Giorgia Meloni, of course. She's very close to, Mario Draghi, and she was really supportive of Mario Draghi's staunch, position against Russia. And I think that she understands that Vladimir Putin actually is not looking at Christian values or other things that she cares about when he's now waging an aggressive and an illegal war against its neighbor. So she understands this aspect. She's really convinced, I think, and I'm confident, of course, hopefully, that she knows that Italy's interest lies in transatlanticism and European solidarity, and this is also why she is, as Dr. Dasu was mentioning before, this is also why there have been frictions and disagreements with Hungary on Russia. And this is why Giorgia Meloni is more closer to Poland in this respect, and I think she will continue on this line. Of course, challenges will come from Matteo Salvini, especially on sanctions, because Salvini is really riding the wave of popular discontent when it comes to the economy. But we also know that data tells us another thing, and this thing is that Russia is suffering a lot due to the sanctions. And I think Salvini, must recognize it, because everyone is, bringing, in the spotlight the effects that sanctions are having on Russia. So we need to continue on this line, I think, and Giorgia Meloni is aware of this. Just one, quick remark regarding Italy's position when it comes to Mediterranean security. Dr. Dasu is right, and also as Dario was mentioning, the Mediterranean will be of critical importance in the foreseeable future. So Italy is perfectly aware of this, and recently has just published a new defense strategy for the Mediterranean, which is not, of course, operational or military doctrine yet, but it's a political document where it's stated clearly that the Mediterranean is our core strategic interest, and in this respect, Italy is, I think it will take greater force to deal with problems in this region, especially since 60% of our GDP, almost 60% is relies on trade, and in the Mediterranean 30% of the global maritime trade is concentrated there. So I think, of course, Italy will look very, very closely to this region. Thank you.
Okay. You mentioned a rift with Hungary, but I would just mention that only a couple of weeks ago, the European Parliament passed a resolution saying that Hungary cannot be considered a full democracy, and both the Lega and Brothers of Italy voted against it. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of plays out now that these are governing parties specifically. But anyway, we're getting close to the end here, so I would like to direct one last question to Dario. If we could return to the issue of China and the Mediterranean, what role is it playing now? I know it's on the rise. What are we seeing in that arena, and what is the new government's policy towards China and its new development initiatives?
Well, thank you. I think if there is one thing on which the three parties of this coalition agree, is to have a harder stance on China. I think especially Fratelli d'Italia with electing personalities like former Ambassador Terzi di Sant'Agata, they made a clear statement about how they see the relationship with China. And on this, if I can connect, I'm grateful to Director Dasu for mentioning the Belt and Road Initiative and Italy's memorandum of understanding with China of March 2019, because I think it's the brightest example of how Italy has the institutional antibodies to preserve its historical foreign policy stance, in the sense that the Minister of Economic Development at the time tried to have this, let's say, alliance. Just 1 month later, Italy also endorsed Japan and the Open and Free Indo-Pacific Region project. So I don't want to do self-promotion, but back in the days, I wrote this article for War on the Rocks, making a comparison between this approach and the Italian approach towards the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente back in the days, saying that this was a sort of Asian version of the Italian historical waltz. So, and now, like, the person who was behind that project, he sacrificed his re-election because he became a committed Atlanticist. So, like former Minister Luigi Di Maio. So my point is, indeed, there can be some politicians or some parties pushing for something different. But then we have the Farnesina, the presidency of the Republic. We have people even inside these parties who understand that certain things cannot be changed. And also, if I can, when it comes to China in the Med, I think the moment of the clear rise of China as a Mediterranean power is a little bit, I don't want to say over, but China has a number of domestic problems that somehow are preventing it from playing the role it used to play a few years ago. Although we must be extremely careful because China is very active in countries like Tunisia or Morocco that are of extreme importance for Italy, and especially Tunisia is completely out of the map of the Italian debate at the moment. But it's one of those countries that the new Italian government should look at it with extreme care because the situation there is getting out of control. And if I can just add to something that Ambassador Eisenberg said regarding Libya, in Italy, there was this very strange thing that no one said anything about Russia and the fact that there was an American citizen acting as a proxy for Russia in Libya, General Khalifa Haftar, but there was a sort of rebellion against the Turkish intervention, saying that it was the proof that Erdogan is implementing this neo-Ottoman like aggressive policy, when in fact Turkey saved Italy and Europe and the United States and Libya from having a Russia proxy as the new Gaddafi. So on this, I think there is a problem in Italy in terms of how sometimes our foreign policy debate is run. And there are still, I would say, some old-fashioned cliche. Turkey is the country that suffer this cliche the most in Italy, I would say. And sometimes I think people realize the imperialistic project in the mind of Putin only on February 24th. Before that, they struggled to see that Syria, Libya, Mali, they were all part of the same picture, basically getting more influence in the south to use that in the east and in the so-called Russian era abroad. Thank you.
Jana, may I add one very big point which could become important maybe. The fact that the new Italy, to put it this way, could be in foreign policy less sensitive, quote unquote, to the human rights dimension of foreign policy, could become a more realpolitik oriented foreign policy. And this would be important for the relationship with countries that have a key importance in the Mediterranean, starting with Turkey, which is having a big influence in Libya, as Luis was mentioning, and adding Egypt, which is equally important for energy reasons. So it can be that the kind of constraints that for the center-left prevent a resumption of relationship with this kind of regimes could be less influential in the case of a coalition like the current one.
May I add something to that for a moment?
Yeah, one minute, give us your last thought.
Just on China. I think when Luigi Di Maio started as the foreign minister, he started with a very low base of knowledge on what it would take to succeed. And the Belt and Road policy that he adopted with China, I view as the single biggest loss, the diplomatic loss that I had while I was there. I'm sure I have some of my colleagues who would say there were bigger losses, but I found that to be a big loss. I will say that what was very important in that is, one, I think if you measured the development that came as a result of that tie, it would be rather minimal in terms of scope. And that I believe what has happened now is the most critical piece of that was 5G, the most important telephonic communication system going. And I believe it is now no longer a potential have for China. And that's a very big element. So
Okay.
Thank you for that. Thank you for allowing me to be here and with all these distinguished members. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to everyone following at home. And I would just say, remember, for the latest analysis and upcoming events, be sure to visit sipa.org and visit our social media channels on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So